If you can answer, I'll clean the room in your place. But when she replied in 3 languages, he was in shock. Landon Hayes detested obstacles in his path, literal or figurative. Walking through the deserted hallway of Radiant Enterprises at that time of night, the 35-year-old CEO frowned at the sight of a figure kneeling on the floor. A blonde woman was scrubbing a stubborn stain on the marble floor, completely absorbed in her task. Landon stopped a few feet away, annoyed by the interruption to his routine. After 15 hours of exhaustive negotiations, he just wanted to grab some documents from his office and go home. And now this, a cleaner blocking his path. "Couldn't this wait until morning?" he asked, his voice laced with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. The woman looked up. She had delicate features and light-colored eyes that regarded him with a serenity that caught him off guard. There wasn't the usual nervousness his presence tended to provoke in employees. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," she replied calmly. "This stain needs to be removed before it sets permanently." Landon narrowed his eyes. Something about her posture intrigued him. There was no submission, no rush to get out of his way, just a calm that bordered on indifference to his presence. An idea crossed his mind. He took a few steps closer and, with a smug smile, decided to test a theory. "Qu'avez-vous bloqué mon chemin, mademoiselle?" he said in fluent French. "You are blocking my path, miss." He expected confusion, perhaps a lost look. Instead, without a second's hesitation, she replied in the same language, "Je m'en excuse, Monsieur Hayes. Ce sera terminé dans un instant. My apology, Mr. Hayes. I will be finished in a moment." Landon felt a shiver of surprise run down his spine. Her French was perfect, not just correct, but with the precise accent of someone who had lived in Paris. "Vous parlez français?" he stated, unable to hide the astonishment in his voice. "Oui, depuis mon enfance," she confirmed, explaining she had spoken it since childhood, as she continued to scrub the floor with precise movements. Something about that answer sparked his curiosity. A cleaner who spoke fluent French. Intriguing. "If you answer, I'll clean it for you," he challenged suddenly, leaning closer to her. She stopped her movements and looked at him directly, a single eyebrow slightly arched. "Is it French, Japanese, or German?" Landon blinked, taken aback by the quick response. The game he had started to intimidate her had now turned against him, sparking a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. "Nihongo wa do desu ka?" he asked in Japanese. "And what about Japanese?" Without the slightest hesitation, she replied, "Hai Nihongo mo hanasemasu, Europa ni sunde ita toki ni manabimashita." "Yes, I also speak Japanese. I learned it when I lived in Europe." Landon felt his heart race. A cleaning lady who spoke French and Japanese. Impossible. "Und Deutsch?" he asked, completing the trio of languages he had mastered. "Natürlich, Deutsch war meine erste Fremdsprache," she answered with the same fluency, explaining that German had been her first foreign language. Landon stood motionless, genuinely impressed for the first time in years. A woman who cleaned floors at night had just demonstrated perfect command of the 3 languages he himself had spent years perfecting. "Who are you?" he finally asked in English, all his previous arrogance replaced by genuine fascination. "Eloise Bennett," she replied simply. "I've been on the cleaning crew for 3 months. That doesn't explain how you speak 3 languages perfectly." A small smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Life doesn't always put us where we expect to be, Mr. Hayes." Landon watched her more closely. The grey uniform couldn't completely disguise a natural elegance in her movements. Her hands, though busy with manual labor, had long, delicate fingers, and there was a dignity in her posture that completely defied the position she held. "Where did you learn to speak these languages?" he insisted, unable to leave the mystery unsolved. "In another life," she answered vaguely, returning her focus to the stain. Landon was not used to evasive answers. In his world, direct questions received direct answers. Without a second thought, he placed his leather briefcase on the floor and knelt beside her. "What are you doing?" Eloise asked, genuinely surprised. "Keeping my word," he replied, reaching for the cleaning cloth. "I said I would clean for you if you answered, and you answered." "In 3 languages. You were just teasing," she noted, not handing over the cloth. "I never break promises," Landon insisted, with a tone that brooked no argument. "Even the ones I make without thinking about the consequences." There was a moment of silence as they looked at each other. Something indefinable passed between them, a mutual recognition, perhaps. Finally, Eloise handed him the damp cloth. "You'll ruin your suit," she warned. "I have others," he replied, starting to scrub the stain with clumsy movements. His impeccably tailored Italian suit was already creasing at the knees, but strangely, he didn't care. After a few seconds of silent observation, Eloise spoke. "Not like that. You're just spreading the stain. You need to use circular motions from the center outwards." Landon looked up, startled by the direct correction. No one in the entire company would dare speak to him that way. To his own surprise, instead of irritation, he felt an involuntary smile form on his lips. "Like this?" he asked, trying to imitate the movements she had been making. "Lay more pressure in the center," she instructed, "and keep the circles consistent." For the next few minutes, the powerful CEO of Radiant Enterprises was on his knees on the marble floor, receiving precise instructions from a cleaner on how to properly remove stains. The scene was so surreal it almost felt like it was from a dream. "You don't seem surprised that I'm doing this," he commented as he worked. "I've seen stranger things," she replied with a slight shrug. "Life has its own sense of humor, Mr. Hayes." When he finally finished, the stain was gone. Landon stood up, looking at the damp marks on his knees and the smell of cleaning product on his hands. "Did I pass the test?" he asked with an irony that strangely lacked its usual cutting edge. "For a rookie, not bad," she replied, gathering the bucket and supplies. "You might have a future in cleaning if the CEO business doesn't work out." Landon laughed, a rare sound that surprised him as much as it seemed to have surprised Eloise. He couldn't remember the last time someone had made a joke at his expense. "Eloise Bennett," he repeated, as if trying to memorize the name. "I want to see you in my office tomorrow at 9. A shadow of concern crossed her face. "Am I being fired?" "On the contrary," he replied. "I'm curious to find out what other talents you're hiding behind that uniform." "Sometimes it's better to leave some mysteries unsolved, Mr. Hayes," she said, a cautious tone in her voice. "I'm not a fan of mysteries," Landon retorted. "I prefer clear answers." "Not all questions have simple answers," Eloise replied. Then, with a slight nod, she added, "Good night, Mr. Hayes." Before he could respond, she was already walking away down the hall, carrying the cleaning bucket with the same dignity a queen would carry a scepter. Landon stood motionless, watching her, until she disappeared from view. Something had shifted that night, a small crack in his perfectly controlled world. A cleaner who spoke 3 languages fluently and wasn't intimidated by his presence. An enigma in the form of a woman. He picked up his briefcase from the floor and continued on his way. But his thoughts remained with Eloise Bennett. The way she had looked at him, not as a CEO, not as an authority figure, but simply as a man. Say a man who, for a few minutes, had stepped off his pedestal to kneel on the floor beside her. For the first time in a long time, Landon Hayes was genuinely intrigued, and though he would never admit it to himself, he was also impressed. Who was Eloise Bennett, really? And what else was she hiding besides her extraordinary command of languages? Tomorrow, he would find out. Landon Hayes always got what he wanted, and now he wanted answers. Landon couldn't sleep. His penthouse apartment, usually a sanctuary of tranquility, felt oppressively silent as he paced barefoot through the living room. He poured himself a rare whiskey, something he rarely did on weekdays, and stood before the panoramic window. The city glittered below, indifferent to his restlessness. That woman, Eloise Bennett, had settled into his thoughts like an irritating puzzle. He couldn't understand how someone who spoke 3 languages fluently had ended up on the night shift of the cleaning crew. The mystery went against his calculating nature, which was used to understanding and cataloging everyone and everything around him. The next morning, he arrived at Radiant Enterprises an hour earlier than usual. Mrs. Peterson, his secretary of 8 years, couldn't hide her surprise as she saw him walk through the doors at 7:30. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. You're early. I need you to locate someone for me," he replied bluntly. "Eloise Bennett. She works on the night cleaning crew." Mrs. Peterson adjusted her glasses, a flicker of curiosity crossing her professionally neutral face. "Right away, sir. Schedule a meeting for 9. In my office. Should I inform her of the reason?" "No." While he waited, Landon reviewed the file the HR department had sent over. It was surprisingly sparse. Hired 3 months ago, minimal references, lived in a modest neighborhood in an outer borough. Nothing that explained the 3 languages or the posture that didn't match the uniform. At 9 o'clock sharp, a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he commanded, automatically assuming his CEO posture, straight back, neutral expression, analytical gaze. Eloise Bennett entered the office. Out of the grey uniform, she wore a simple navy blue dress that, while modest, fit her figure perfectly. Her loose blonde hair framed her face, falling in soft waves to her shoulders. Without the tight bun from the previous night, she looked younger and, paradoxically, more sophisticated. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she greeted, her voice as calm as it had been the night before. "Have a seat," he instructed, watching her closely. Eloise complied, maintaining an upright posture with her hands resting calmly in her lap. She showed none of the usual nervousness that his office provoked in people. She simply waited, as if meetings with CEOs were part of her daily routine. "You intrigue me, Ms. Bennett," Landon began, deciding to get straight to the point. "Last night, I discovered that a cleaning staff member speaks 3 languages with perfect fluency. That has piqued my curiosity." "Understandable," she agreed, without offering any further explanation. A silence settled between them. Landon, used to dominating conversations, felt strangely disarmed. There was nothing confrontational in her demeanor, but there was also none of the automatic deference he was used to receiving. "I want to understand your story," he finally said. "How someone with your talent ends up working the night shift on the cleaning crew." Eloise studied him for a moment, as if assessing how much she could trust him. "Why do you care?" she finally asked. The direct question caught him by surprise. No one in his company would dare question his motives like that. "Let's just say, I'm curious," he replied after a pause, "and I don't like unsolved puzzles in my company." "And what if I say that I enjoy cleaning floors? That it's an honest job that allows me to support my daughter? I'd say you're wasting your potential," he retorted promptly, "and that there are more efficient ways to support a child." To his surprise, Eloise laughed, a soft musical sound that seemed to momentarily brighten the serious room. "Touché, Mr. Hayes." A new silence settled, but it was different from the last. There was an expectant tension, as if they both knew they were about to cross an invisible boundary. "I was born Eloise Reinhardt," she began at last, her voice calm and controlled. "The only daughter of Victor Reinhardt, owner of Reinhardt International." Landon couldn't hide his surprise. Reinhardt International was a renowned European technology conglomerate. Victor Reinhardt, its founder, was known as much for his genius as for his inflexibility. "I grew up on an estate on the outskirts of Munich. I had the best education money could buy, private tutors, boarding schools in Switzerland, exchanges in France and Japan." She paused, a sad smile appearing on her lips. "My father believed that languages were the key to business success. He himself spoke 5 fluently." "And how did Victor Reinhardt's daughter end up cleaning floors in my company?" Landon asked, genuinely intrigued. Eloise's eyes took on a distant glint, as if she were seeing a past she could still picture clearly. "At 22 is when I returned from university. I fell in love with the family's chauffeur, Thomas Bennett. He was British, ex-military, and had come to Germany seeking a fresh start." Her voice softened as she spoke of him. "He was smart, kind, and so different from the men my father would have considered appropriate for his heiress." Landon nodded, beginning to understand. "We tried to keep the relationship a secret, But in a house with dozens of staff, there are no real secrets. My father found out, of course. Eloise paused, taking a deep breath. He gave me an ultimatum: end the relationship or be disowned. And you chose the chauffeur, Landon concluded. I chose Thomas, she corrected softly, looking him directly in the eye. I chose love over money, freedom over expectations. I chose my own life. There was something in the way she said those words, without remorse, without drama, just the simple statement of fact that touched Landon in a way he hadn't expected. We left Germany that same night. My father had security escort us off the property. He allowed me to take only a suitcase of clothes and my personal documents. Her voice remained calm, but Landon could sense the pain contained beneath the surface. We went to London. We got married in a simple ceremony, and I took his last name. For 8 years, we built a life together. I gave private language lessons. He worked as an executive driver. It wasn't luxurious, but we were happy. Her face softened as she continued. We had a daughter, Ivy. She's 5 now. A brief smile lit up her face. She has her father's light eyes and my blonde hair. She's bright and curious, like all the Reinhardts, I suppose. And what happened? Landon asked, sensing the story didn't end there. Eloise's expression shifted subtly, a shadow passing over her eyes. 2 years ago, Thomas was in an accident. He was driving a client when a drunk driver ran a red light. She paused, swallowing visibly. He died instantly. Landon felt a tightness in his chest. The way she recounted the tragedy, without tears but with a restrained pain in every word, was more moving than any emotional display could have been. I'm sorry, he said, and was surprised to realize he truly meant it. Suddenly, I was a 30-year-old widow with a young daughter to raise. Our apartment was rented. Our savings were limited. Thomas's insurance helped initially, but London is an expensive city. Eloise lifted her chin slightly, a subtle gesture of pride. I tried to contact my father. After 8 years with no communication, I thought maybe the news that he had a granddaughter might soften his heart. And it didn't, Landon concluded. He wouldn't even take my calls. His assistant, the same one who used to organize my childhood birthday parties, coldly informed me that Mr. Reinhardt did not have a daughter. Her voice remained calm, but Landon could feel the depth of the wound. For the next 2 years, I did everything I could to survive in London. I tutored, worked as a receptionist, tried freelance translation. She sighed. But the costs were impossible. The rent, daycare for Ivy, the bills that never stopped coming. 3 months ago, I decided we needed a new start. I researched cities with a lower cost of living, but with opportunities. We moved here. And started working as a cleaner, he completed. She nodded. It was what I could find immediately. The night shift allows me to be with Ivy during the day. A kind neighbor watches her at night while I work. It's not ideal, but... She shrugged, a gesture that seemed to carry the weight of the world. We do what is necessary for the ones we love. Landon watched her in silence, absorbing her story. In his world of corporate acquisitions and quarterly profits, he rarely heard stories of personal sacrifice, of choices made for love, not for gain. Why are you telling me all this? He finally asked. We barely know each other. Because you asked, she replied simply. And because, despite your reputation, last night you knelt on the floor to clean a stain that wasn't your responsibility. That suggests there might be more to Landon Hayes than the rumors indicate. Landon looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with how she seemed to see right through his carefully constructed facade. Can you prove this story? He asked, returning to the familiar ground of business. I have my degree from the University of Munich, certificates of proficiency in the languages, my marriage certificate, Thomas's death certificate. Her voice wavered slightly on the last phrase. So I can provide contacts who will confirm what I've said. Landon nodded, slowly twirling a pen between his fingers as he formulated his thoughts. Radiant Enterprises is expanding its operations in Europe and Asia, he said finally. We're looking for qualified interpreters to facilitate international negotiations. He looked directly at her. I would like to offer you a position as a corporate interpreter. Eloise blinked, clearly caught by surprise. Interpreter. The salary would be 5 times your current one. Regular business hours, full health insurance for you and your daughter, additional benefits. Landon spoke with the same precision he would use in any negotiation. So considering your skills, it would be a waste to keep you cleaning floors. A silence followed as Eloise watched him intently, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. Why would you do this for me? She finally asked. You barely know me. I'm not doing this for you, Landon replied with his characteristic honesty. I'm doing it for my company. Talents like yours are rare and valuable. I'd be a terrible businessman if I didn't seize them when they cross my path. Eloise smiled slightly, as if she appreciated his frankness. And Ivy, how would I care for her during the workday? We have a corporate daycare on the 5th floor. Employees in management positions are entitled to use it for free. She raised her eyebrows. Is interpreter considered a management position? It can be, he replied with a slight shrug. The rules are flexible for whomever I decide they are. Eloise studied him for a few more moments before speaking again. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hayes. It's generous and unexpected. She paused. But I need to think about it. It's a significant change. Landon nodded, surprised by her hesitation. Most people would have jumped at an opportunity like that without a second thought. You have until tomorrow to decide, he said, maintaining his professional tone. The position needs to be filled quickly. Eloise stood up gracefully. I understand. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow. As she turned to leave, Landon felt an inexplicable urge to say something more, something not related to business. Miss Bennett, he called out, causing her to stop and look back. Your father made a mistake. By choosing pride over his daughter. Her eyes shone with restrained emotion. Thank you for saying that, Mr. Hayes. After Eloise left, Landon remained seated, contemplating the conversation they had just had. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard someone speak so honestly about loss and difficult choices, about love and sacrifice. In his world of power and privilege, such stories rarely found a place. The people around him talked about mergers and acquisitions, market strategies and profits, not about broken hearts and promises kept at the cost of personal comfort. Without realizing it, Landon ran his fingers over the frame of the only personal item on his desk, an old photo of his parents, taken years before the divorce that had transformed his childhood. He remembered how his own father had chosen his business empire over his family, how he himself had followed a similar path, prioritizing power and control above human connections. Perhaps that was why Eloise's story had touched him so deeply. She had made the opposite choice, love over money, family over status. And despite all the hardships, there was a dignity in her posture, a peace in her eyes that Landon's money had never been able to buy. The next morning at precisely 9 o'clock, Eloise knocked on his door again. This time, she wore a simple black pencil skirt and a white blouse, modest, yet appropriate for a corporate environment. I accept your offer, she said simply as soon as she entered. Landon nodded, feeling a satisfaction that went beyond a simple professional victory. Excellent. The HR department is already preparing your paperwork. You officially start on Monday. In the weeks that followed, Eloise Bennett quickly proved her worth. Her first major contribution came during a video conference with Japanese investors, a negotiation that had been stalled for months due to cultural differences, as the international department had diagnosed. Eloise didn't just translate the words, but also the meanings behind them. She explained to Landon cultural nuances that the team was missing, suggested more appropriate approaches, and identified points of resistance that weren't being explicitly verbalized. When he says, we will consider it carefully, he's actually politely declining, she whispered to Landon during a break. We need to offer an alternative that allows him to accept without losing face. The deal was closed in 2 weeks, after 8 months of stalemate. Next came a partnership with a German tech company. Again, Eloise was instrumental, not just as a translator, but as a cultural mediator. She knew the German business mentality from the inside and could anticipate objections before they were even raised. The Germans value precision and detailed planning, she explained during a preparatory meeting. If we can provide an exact timeline with all steps clearly defined, they will feel much more comfortable with the partnership. Gradually, the employees at Radiant Enterprises began to notice the new interpreter. They commented on her intelligence, her Polish, her ability to simplify complex concepts. No one knew that, just a month earlier, she had been cleaning the same hallways she now walked with confident strides, and Landon Hayes, against all expectations, began to admire her, not just for her professional skills, but for something harder to define. Perhaps it was the dignity with which she carried her story, or the way she spoke, always direct, without the political games that infested the corporate environment. Or maybe it was simply because, for the first time in a long time, someone had broken through the armor he had built around himself. Not with force or cunning, but with something much rarer in his world, pure and simple truth. The corporate daycare at Radiant Enterprises was closed for renovations. The notice had arrived by email the previous evening, catching Eloise by surprise. Her neighbor, who occasionally watched Ivy, had gone to visit her daughter. With no alternatives, Eloise made a risky decision: she would bring Ivy to work. "You need to be very, very quiet, understand?" she explained to her daughter as she packed a small backpack with crayons, a drawing pad, children's books, and a tablet with headphones. "Mommy has a very important meeting today." Ivy nodded solemnly, her clear eyes shining with the entrusted responsibility. At 5 years old, she had a maturity that surprised even Eloise, a consequence, perhaps, of growing up with a single mother who fought daily to survive. "I'll be invisible," the little girl promised, placing a finger over her lips in a gesture of silence. They arrived at the company early. Eloise knew the building well, both from her time as a cleaner and now as an interpreter. She knew there was a small file room at the end of the 6th-floor hallway that was rarely used. She settled Ivy there, improvising a comfortable space between the shelves. "Mommy will come back to check on you whenever I can," she said, kissing the top of her daughter's blonde head. "Do you remember our deal? Stay quiet and don't leave," Ivy replied, already opening her drawing pad. "You can go, Mommy. I'm going to draw our dream house." Eloise smiled, touched by the little one's resilience. There was so much of Thomas in her. The same patience, the same unshakable optimism. "I'll be in the conference room at the end of the hall. If you need anything..." "I know, Mommy," Ivy interrupted with an exaggerated sigh of someone who had heard the same instructions dozens of times, only in an emergency. The morning went surprisingly well. Eloise managed to slip away twice to check on her daughter, finding her absorbed in her drawings, headphones isolating her from the outside world as she watched cartoons on the tablet. Landon Hayes was having a difficult day. The video conference with the German investors had been tense, with unexpected questions about the financial stability of a new project. He needed a few minutes alone to reorganize his thoughts before the next meeting. He decided to walk down the 6th floor, which was less busy than his own. As he walked along the silent corridor, a slightly ajar door caught his attention. It was unusual to find unlocked rooms on that floor. He approached to close it when he noticed movement inside. He stopped, surprised to see a small blonde figure sitting on the floor, surrounded by colored pencils. A girl of about 5 was drawing intently, headphones covering her delicate ears. Landon hesitated. Children were not allowed on this floor. In fact, children weren't allowed anywhere in the company outside of the daycare. He was about to look for a security guard when something about the girl's appearance made him pause. That blonde hair, it reminded him of someone. Without realizing it, he pushed the door slightly, causing it to creak. The girl looked up, her clear eyes widening when she saw him. She quickly removed the headphones, sitting up straighter. "You're the boss," she said simply, with no fear in her voice, only a statement of fact. Landon blinked, surprised by the direct observation. "And you're not supposed to be here," he replied, but without the severity he would normally use. "Mommy had nowhere to leave me," the girl explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The daycare is broken. Under renovation," he corrected automatically, still trying to process the situation. Suddenly, it all made sense. "Your mother is Eloise Bennett." The girl smiled, revealing a small gap where a baby tooth was missing. "I'm Ivy," she introduced herself, holding out a small hand as if she were a miniature adult. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hayes." Landon took her hand, surprised by the formal gesture. Her hand disappeared completely inside his. "How do you know my name?" "Mommy talks about you," Ivy replied, turning her attention back to her drawing. "She says you're very smart and—" She frowned, as if trying to remember the exact words, "and demanding." Landon couldn't help a small smile. "Or demanding, am I?" "She says it's good to be demanding when you're looking for quality," Ivy added, selecting a blue pencil. "Like when I choose my crayons, I only use the best ones." Landon looked around, noticing Eloise's efforts to keep her daughter occupied without disturbing anyone. He felt an unexpected admiration for her commitment, both as a professional and as a mother. He moved a little closer, curious about what the girl was drawing so intently. "May I see?" he asked, pointing to the notebook. Ivy seemed to consider the question for a moment, as if assessing whether she could trust him with something as personal as her drawing. Finally, she turned the notebook towards him. On the paper, 3 stick figures were holding hands in front of what looked like a house: a tall woman with yellow hair, a small girl who was also blonde, and a man in a suit. "Is that you, your mommy, and me?" Landon asked, feeling something strange in his chest. Ivy nodded solemnly. "It's you." "But smiling much," she explained, pointing to the wide smile she had drawn on the male figure's face. "I've never seen it, but I imagined it." Landon stood frozen, the girl's words hitting him like a punch to the gut. "I've never seen it." Did he really never smile? And why had this child, who barely knew him, included him in her family drawing? "Why did you draw me?" he managed to ask finally, his voice hoarser than he intended. Ivy shrugged, with the disarming simplicity of children. "Mommy smiles when she talks about you." "And she didn't smile much before?" Landon felt something hot and uncomfortable rise up his neck, an emotion he couldn't name, let alone control. This little creature, with a few words and a simple drawing, had penetrated deeper into his defenses than any adult had managed in years. At that moment, the door opened completely, and Eloise appeared, her face pale with worry. "Mr. Hayes, I can explain," she began, clearly alarmed to find the CEO with her daughter. Landon stood up quickly, feeling strangely guilty, as if he had been caught doing something improper. "Your daughter is very talented," he said, indicating the drawing, "and quite articulate for her age." Eloise relaxed slightly, though concern was still visible in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for bringing her. The daycare is under renovation and I had no one to leave her with. I promise this won't affect my work." "Mommy, I showed Mr. Hayes my drawing," Ivy intervened, completely oblivious to the tension between the adults. "He's in our family picture." Eloise's face flushed intensely. "Ivy has a very active imagination," she explained quickly, avoiding looking directly at Landon. An awkward silence fell over them. Landon realized he was in uncharted territory. There were no corporate protocols or negotiation strategies that could guide him in this situation. "The meeting with the Germans has been postponed until tomorrow," he finally said, opting for the safe ground of work. "You can take the rest of the day to be with your daughter." "That's not necessary, Mr. Hayes. I can complete the pending translations and—" "It wasn't a suggestion, Miss Bennett," he interrupted, but without his usual coldness. "Consider it a paid day off." Before Eloise could thank him, Landon was already leaving the room. He needed air, distance, time to process the strange vulnerability he felt. As he walked back to his office, the image of the drawing remained vivid in his mind. 3 figures holding hands, an improvised family where he, inexplicably, had been included. "It's you." But smiling, "I've never seen it, but I imagined it." The child's simple words echoed in his mind, opening a crack in his carefully constructed armor. For the first time in years, Landon Hayes felt something he had forgotten he was capable of feeling, the desire to be more than just the man in the suit, the ruthless CEO, the relentless negotiator, the desire to be someone who smiled. Something was different at Radiant Enterprises. Landon couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but the change was undeniable. The once silent hallways now carried lively conversations. Meetings that used to be tense flowed more naturally. Even the coffee in the break room seemed better, though it was the same as always. Sitting in his office on a Friday afternoon, Landon watched through the glass walls the movement of the company he had built with such dedication. Employees walked between departments with a renewed energy. An occasional laugh echoed down the hall, a sound that would have previously been considered inappropriate in the formal environment he himself had created. His secretary entered, after a quick knock on the door. "Mr. Hayes, the quarterly reports you asked for," Mrs. Peterson said, placing a folder on his desk. Before leaving, she hesitated. "If I may say so, sir, the company feels different lately." Landon looked up from the documents he was analyzing. "Different? How?" "More alive," she replied, choosing her word carefully. "The mood has improved. People are collaborating more. Even the legal and finance departments are communicating without their usual hostility." After she left, Landon leaned back in his chair, reflecting on her observation. The change had started subtly, about 2 months ago. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, right after Eloise Bennett was hired as the corporate interpreter. Eloise had integrated into the company with impressive ease. Unlike many new employees who spent weeks trying to understand the dynamics at Radiant, she seemed to have instantly grasped the corporate culture and, more surprisingly, had begun to transform it from the inside out. It all started with small gestures. Eloise would begin her meetings with brief informal conversation, establishing personal connections before getting down to business. She remembered everyone's names, asked about their families, and celebrated small victories that would normally go unnoticed. During international negotiations, her skill went far beyond literal translation. She captured cultural nuances, explained contexts, and facilitated understanding that had previously been lost in direct communication. Under her influence, deals that once took weeks to close were now finalized in days. The International Relations Department, once known for its rigid formality, now held monthly lunches where employees of different hierarchical levels could chat freely. The idea had been Eloise's, of course, though she never claimed credit for it. And then there was Ivy. Since the incident in the file room, Landon had noticed the little girl appearing occasionally at the company, always on days when the daycare closed early. With Landon's reluctant permission, Eloise had adapted a small space in the corner of her office for her daughter. Strangely, the girl's presence didn't cause disruptions. On the contrary, employees who rarely interacted started stopping by to chat briefly with the child, exchanging smiles and small kindnesses. Ivy had a natural talent for breaking down barriers. "The Eloise effect," Landon murmured to himself, finally naming the phenomenon he was observing. As if summoned by his thoughts, a soft knock on the door announced Eloise's arrival. "Excuse me, Mr. Hayes, I have news about the negotiation with the Nakamura Group." Landon indicated the chair in front of him. He watched as she sat gracefully, an organized folder in her hands. She wore a simple yet elegant suit, a far cry from the grey cleaner's uniform she wore when they first met, but carried with the same natural dignity. "So did the Japanese accept our proposal?" he asked, trying not to show his anxiety. The partnership with the Nakamura Group would represent Radiant's entry into the Asian market, a goal he had been pursuing for 3 years without success. "Better than that," Eloise replied, a small smile on her lips. "They've increased their initial investment by 15% and proposed an exclusivity deal for 5 years, not 3 as we had requested." Landon blinked, genuinely surprised. "How did you manage that? We'd been negotiating for months with no significant progress." "I realized we were focusing on the numbers when we should have been building trust," she explained. "For the Japanese, business is fundamentally about long-term relationships. After I mentioned your admiration for their business philosophy and shared a few stories about Radiant's founding, Mr. Nakamura commented that he finally felt he understood the man behind the company. Landon leaned back in his chair, processing the information. "You told them stories about me? I hope you don't mind," she replied, a faint blush rising on her neck. "I researched the founding of Radiant, how you built the company from scratch after leaving college. It's an inspiring story." "I never thought of it as a story," he admitted. I just did what needed to be done." "That's exactly what makes the story powerful," Eloise said. "Your determination." Mr. Nakamura particularly valued how you maintained control of the company even when investors tried to oust you from leadership during the 2019 crisis. Landon felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He wasn't used to having his past actions revisited, let alone presented as inspiring narratives. "The contract will be signed next week," Eloise continued. "Mr. Nakamura is sending his son to finalize the details in person instead of doing it remotely as we had planned. Another sign of respect. This is extraordinary," Landon concluded, allowing himself a rare moment of satisfaction. "Your work has been exceptional, Ms. Bennett." "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." A comfortable silence settled between them. Landon realized that, unlike many of his employees who were visibly nervous in his presence, Eloise seemed perfectly at ease. "So would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow?" The words came out before he could fully consider them. "To celebrate the Nakamura deal. Bring Ivy, too." The surprise on her face was evident, but it quickly turned into a warm smile. "We would be delighted," she replied. "Ivy will be thrilled. She talks about you a lot." "Really?" he asked, genuinely curious. "She keeps the drawing she made with you in it," Eloise explained. "She says you're the only adult who's ever taken her drawing seriously." Something moved within Landon's chest, that same strange, warm feeling he had felt when he first saw Ivy's drawing. "I'll send a car to pick you up at 70, he said, returning to the safe ground of practical arrangements. The next evening, Landon waited at the restaurant, discreetly checking his watch. He had chosen Lumiere, an elegant but not overly formal establishment with a menu that could please both adults and children. He had requested a more private table, away from the central buzz-e overlooking a small illuminated garden. Why was he nervous? It was just a business dinner. A professional celebration, nothing more. Still, he had changed his tie twice before leaving home and had asked the maitre d' to make sure they had a booster seat reserved. He saw them arrive and stood up immediately. Eloise wore a simple dark blue dress that enhanced her eyes. Ivy, holding her mother's hand, wore a skirt and blouse set, her blonde hair tied in an elaborate braid. She looked like a little princess. "Mr. Hayes," Ivy exclaimed upon seeing him, letting go of her mother and running towards him. "Look, I'm wearing a dress too." "I see that," he replied, surprising himself with the impulse to crouch down to her level. "How you look very elegant, Miss Ivy." The little girl laughed at the formal address. "You look handsome too. Mommy said your suit is impeccable." She pronounced the word carefully, as if she had just learned it. Eloise approached, a light blush on her cheeks. Sorry for her enthusiasm. She's been excited about the dinner all day. "No need for apologies," Landon replied, gesturing to the table. "It's refreshing." The dinner began with polite formality, but Ivy's naturalness soon broke any remaining tension. The girl told stories about school, about the friends she had made at the company daycare, about her latest drawings. And then Mrs. Peterson gave me a special red pen, Ivy narrated, while savoring her ice cream for dessert. She said it's the same one she uses to mark important things on your calendar. "My secretary is giving you office supplies?" Landon asked, amused. "Every Wednesday," the girl confirmed seriously. "We're building my professional arsenal. That's what she called it." Eloise shook her head, smiling. "Your team has been incredibly kind to Ivy. Mr. Donovan from Finance taught her how to do origami. Mr. Chen from IT fixed her tablet when she accidentally spilled juice on it." "Radiant has never had an official mascot," Landon commented. "It seems Ivy has taken on the role." They laughed together, and Landon realized how pleasant the sound was. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed so freely during a dinner. His social engagements were usually calculated, strategic, always with a clear professional goal. As the evening progressed, the conversations flowed naturally. Heloise talked about her childhood in Germany, the trips with her father to business meetings that had ended up inspiring her love for languages. Landon found himself sharing stories about the early days of Radiant, the sleepless nights working in his tiny apartment, the thrill of closing his first significant contract. "Don't you smile more when you tell those stories?" Eloise observed softly. "You seem more connected." "I never think much about the past," he admitted, always focused on the next goal, the next quarter. "Mommy says that very busy people sometimes forget to live in the present," commented Ivy, who was playing with her napkin, folding it into different shapes. Landon and Eloise exchanged a look, surprised by the child's perceptiveness. "Your mother is very wise," Landon replied. When the dinner ended, Landon insisted on accompanying them home. The driver pulled up in front of a small apartment building in a modest but well-kept neighborhood. "Thank you for the wonderful dinner," Eloise said when they reached her door. "It was very kind of you to include Ivy." "It was my pleasure," he replied sincerely. "We should do this again sometime." Before Eloise could answer, Ivy stepped forward. "Can we go to the zoo next time? The teacher said there are new pandas." "Ivy!" Eloise gently chided her. "Mr. Hayes is a very busy man." "I think I could find time to see pandas," Landon replied, surprising himself. "If your mother agrees, of course." Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding, an unexplored possibility. Landon realized he had been looking into Eloise's eyes for longer than was professionally appropriate, but he couldn't look away. "Good night, Landon," Eloise said softly, using his first name for the first time. The sound of his name in her voice sent a strange sensation through his chest, as if something long frozen was slowly beginning to melt. "Good night, Eloise. Good night, Ivy." On the way back to his apartment, Landon looked at the city lights with new eyes. The sense of emptiness that usually accompanied him at the end of a long day was absent. In its place, there was an unusual warmth, a sense of contentment he couldn't quite name. He thought about how his life had changed in recent months. The company that once ran like a well-oiled machine, but cold and impersonal, now pulsed with a different energy. Employees who had once just done their jobs now seemed genuinely invested in their collective success. And he himself, the ever-distant and ruthless CEO, had found himself crouching to a child's height, laughing openly during dinner, sharing personal stories he had never told anyone. His phone buzzed with a message. It was a picture of Ivy, already in her pajamas, hugging a small teddy bear. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Hayes. My bear Freddy would also like to meet the pandas." Landon smiled at his phone screen, a warm feeling expanding in his chest. He simply replied, "It will be a pleasure to meet Freddy." "Good night, Miss Ivy." As the car approached his luxurious apartment, he realized with sudden clarity that the Eloise effect was not limited to the company. It had begun to transform him too, slowly thawing years of self-imposed isolation. For the first time in a long time, perhaps for the first time in his life, Landon Hayes wanted to be part of something he couldn't control, negotiate, or acquire. He wanted to be part of that small circle of trust and affection that Eloise and Ivy had created. He wanted to belong. And that, more than anything, both terrified and fascinated him in equal measure. The alarm clock went off as always at 5:30 a.m. Landon turned it off with an automatic motion and lay there, staring at his bedroom ceiling. It had been 3 weeks since the dinner with Eloise and Ivy. 3 weeks since he had felt that unfamiliar warmth in his chest. 3 weeks since he had begun to deliberately pull away. He got up and walked to the window. The city was still asleep, with only a few lights dotting the urban landscape. His reflection in the glass showed a man with a tense expression, tired eyes. He wasn't sleeping well. "Ridiculous," he muttered to himself. "Completely ridiculous." At Radiant Enterprises, Landon reorganized his schedule to avoid direct encounters with Eloise. He transferred supervision of the relations with the Nakamura Group to the Vice President of International Operations. He sent memos via email instead of holding personal meetings. When encounters were unavoidable, he remained strictly professional, ending conversations the exact moment the work matters were concluded. In his office, he stared at financial reports without really seeing them. Images insisted on invading his thoughts, Ivy laughing as she showed him her drawing, Eloise using his first name that night at her apartment door, the little teddy bear in the photo he had received. He opened his desk drawer and took out an old picture frame. In it, a younger Landon smiled next to a dark-haired woman. Olivia, his only serious relationship, back in college. The woman who had left him for a colleague after 3 years together, claiming he was emotionally unavailable, always more committed to his ambitions than to the relationship. After her, there had been a few superficial involvements. Nothing that threatened his independence, his total dedication to the company he was building. It was safer that way, more controllable, less painful. And now this unwanted vulnerability he felt in the presence of Eloise and her daughter. This inexplicable desire to be a part of their lives, to belong to something he hadn't built or conquered. His phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Peterson, reminding him of the board meeting in 15 minutes. He mentally thanked her for the interruption. Work was his refuge. It always had been. He just had to dive into it with more intensity. In the elevator, he briefly crossed paths with Eloise. She smiled politely, without expectation. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." "Ms. Bennett," he replied with a formal nod. He had reverted to using her last name, a subtle but effective barrier. "Is the report on the German negotiations ready?" "Yes, sir. I emailed it last night." "Excellent." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Before the elevator reached the next floor, Landon glanced at his watch. "I have a meeting." "Excuse me." He exited hastily, aware of Eloise's gaze on his back. In the days that followed, Landon intensified his withdrawal. He traveled to 3 different cities in 1 week. He scheduled external meetings he would normally delegate. He arrived even earlier and left even later, ensuring their paths rarely crossed. At home, sitting alone with a glass of whiskey, he contemplated the absurdity of the situation. He was 40 years old, ran a multi-million-dollar company, and made decisions that affected hundreds of lives daily. And there he was, hiding from a woman and a 5-year-old child. "What is happening to me?" he asked the empty room. He knew the answer, though he didn't want to admit it. He was scared of caring too much, scared that if he allowed Eloise and Ivy to truly enter his life, he would never be the same again. He would never again have the absolute control he so cherished. And there was the greater fear, the fear of hurting them. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know how to be a partner. His own childhood had been marked by paternal abandonment, by a man who had chosen his career over his family. Wasn't he repeating that same pattern now, dedicating himself exclusively to Radiant? What right did he have to enter the life of a child who had already lost her father once? What guarantee could he offer that he wouldn't end up disappointing them, as he had been disappointed, as he had disappointed Olivia? It was better this way. Better to keep his distance. Better to focus on what he knew how to do. Work, conquer, build. Eloise noticed the change. Of course. How could she not? The man who had knelt to clean the floor, who had invited her and her daughter to dinner, who had proposed visiting pandas at the zoo, now could barely stay in the same room with her for more than 2 minutes. She didn't pressure him. She respected his space, his silence, his evident confusion. She remained professional, carrying out her responsibilities with the same competence as always. If she suffered from his withdrawal, she didn't show it. Only once, when she saw Landon practically change direction upon spotting her in the hallway, did she allow herself a sad sigh. Mark Chen from the IT department, who was walking beside her, noticed. "The boss has been strange lately," he commented. "More distant than usual, if that's even possible." Eloise just nodded, without elaborating. At home, while preparing dinner, she was surprised by Ivy's direct question. "Why did the boss disappear, Mommy?" Eloise almost dropped the spoon she was holding. How could she explain to her daughter something she didn't fully understand herself? "Mr. Hayes is very busy, sweetie. He has a lot of responsibilities." Ivy shook her head, unconvinced by the simplistic explanation. He promised to take me to see the pandas. And Mr. Hayes said he never breaks promises. Eloise sat down next to her daughter, brushing a blonde strand of hair from her face. Sometimes people get confused, Ivy. Even grown-ups. Does he not like us anymore? The question was so innocent, so direct, that Eloise felt a pang in her chest. That's not it, sweetie. I think sometimes people run away from what they want the most. Why? Ivy insisted, with the relentless logic of children. Because they want it so much, and that's scary. Ivy considered the answer for a few seconds, her little forehead furrowed in concentration. So he'll come back when he's not scared anymore? Eloise smiled, gently tapping her daughter's nose. Maybe. But we can't wait for that, right? We have a beautiful life, the two of us. Ivy nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. But before returning to her drawing, she made one last observation. He seemed less sad when he was with us. Eloise watched her daughter walk away, feeling a mixture of pride in her insight and sadness at the truth in her words. She was right, of course. Landon Hayes had seemed less lonely, less distant, when he had allowed them to get close, but it wasn't up to her to force that closeness. Some paths, each person must walk alone, even powerful CEOs who command business empires, especially them. The morning began with a relentless rain. The grey sky seemed to reflect Landon's mood as he reviewed the latest quarterly figures. The projections were excellent. Radiant Enterprises had never been in better financial shape. The partnership with the Nakamura Group had exceeded all expectations, opening up the Asian market far more broadly than anticipated. Professionally, everything was perfect. Personally, a persistent emptiness had been his companion for weeks. Landon glanced at the clock, 7:40 in the morning. He had arrived exceptionally early, as he had been doing since he decided to keep his distance from Eloise. It was easier to avoid her if he completely altered his routine. A movement in the hallway caught his attention. Through the glass walls of his office, he saw Eloise walking slowly toward her own office. There was something wrong with her usually graceful posture. She seemed unsteady. Landon stood up, concern momentarily overcoming his determination to keep his distance. He approached his office door just in time to see Eloise lean heavily against the wall, one hand pressed to her forehead. "Ms. Bennett," he called out, the formality automatic in his voice, though his heart was racing with worry. She looked up, her pale face contrasting with abnormally flushed cheeks. "I'm fine, Mr. Hayes." "Just a little." She couldn't finish the sentence. Her knees buckled and she would have fallen if Landon hadn't rushed to catch her. "You're burning up with fever," he said, feeling the alarming heat radiating from her even through the fabric of her clothes. "I need to work," Eloise murmured, trying to straighten up. "The video conference with the Germans?" "Forget the video conference," Landon cut in, his tone admitting no argument. "You need a doctor, now." Without waiting for a reply, he put an arm around her waist to support her and used his free hand to call his secretary. "Mrs. Peterson, cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. And get my driver immediately." While they waited for the elevator, Landon realized Eloise could barely stand. Without hesitation, he scooped her up into his arms. She was surprisingly light. "That's not necessary," she protested weakly, though her head fell against his shoulder. "Don't argue," he replied, stepping into the empty elevator. A few early arriving employees watched the scene with astonishment. The always reserved CEO carrying the corporate interpreter, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Landon ignored the stares. Nothing mattered, except getting Eloise medical help. In the car, she was shivering despite the feverish heat. Landon took off his own coat and covered her, adjusting the air conditioning. "Ivy," she murmured in a faint voice. "I need to pick up Ivy from school." "I've already arranged for that," Landon assured her. In truth, he had mobilized half of his HR department to ensure the little girl would be picked up and taken safely to the hospital. Just focus on getting better now. At the hospital, his influence ensured immediate attention. While doctors examined Eloise, Landon waited in the waiting room, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Why was he so worried? Why did his heart feel like it was being squeezed in his chest as he waited for news? He knew the answer, though he had spent weeks trying to deny it. He cared about her, more than he should, more than was safe. Mr. Hayes, he turned abruptly. Mrs. Rodriguez, his HR assistant, stood at the entrance to the waiting room, holding the hand of a visibly frightened Ivy. She wanted to come right away, the assistant explained. Fabi couldn't convince her to wait anywhere else. Ivy looked at him with wide eyes, her small face tight with worry. "Where's Mommy? Is she very sick?" Landon approached, and for the first time since he had met her, didn't hesitate before crouching down to her level. "Your mommy is being taken care of by the best doctors," he said softly. "She's going to be okay." "Promise?" Ivy asked, her voice small and trembling. "I promise," he replied, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "And I never break promises, remember?" Ivy nodded, but her clear eyes were still full of worry. "You disappeared," she said simply, the childish accusation hitting him like a well-aimed arrow. "Sire, but now you're back." Landon felt a lump in his throat. "Yes, I'm back, and I'm not going anywhere." A doctor approached at that moment. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Bennett has a rather serious case of pneumonia. We've started her on intravenous antibiotics, and she'll need to be hospitalized for a few days." "Can we see her?" Landon asked, feeling Ivy's small hand squeeze his. "Briefly, she needs to rest." The hospital room was private. Landon had insisted on it. Eloise was lying with her eyes closed, an IV line connected to her arm. She looked so fragile, so different from the confident woman he knew. "Mommy?" Ivy called softly, approaching the bed. Eloise opened her eyes slowly, a small smile forming on her lips as she saw her daughter. "Hi, my love. Are you going to get better soon?" the little girl asked, her voice full of concern. "Yes, I will," Eloise assured her, reaching out to touch her daughter's face. Only then did she notice Landon, standing a little behind. Their eyes met for a moment. "Mr. Hayes, you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," he interrupted gently. "Rest now. We're here." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Landon coordinated everything from the hospital room, working on his laptop while Eloise slept. He arranged for meals for Ivy, made sure the medical staff was attentive to any changes, and even sent for some toys and books to entertain the little girl. In the afternoon, while Eloise slept under the effect of the medication, Landon tried to keep Ivy distracted. Together, they worked on a jigsaw puzzle he had sent for from the hospital gift shop. The girl's concentration was impressive for her age. "Your mum told me you like to draw," he commented, looking for a safe topic of conversation. Ivy nodded. "I do. But I also like puzzles. Mummy says I'm good at seeing how the pieces fit together." "She's right. You're very observant." The girl placed another piece in position before looking up at him. "Why did you stop coming to see us?" Mommy was sad. The direct question caught him off guard. How could he explain the complex fears and insecurities of an adult to a 5-year-old child? "Sometimes adults get confused," he finally answered. "Mommy said you were scared," Ivy said, surprising him with her perception. "But I didn't understand of what." "You're big and strong. What could scare you?" Landon looked at the sleeping figure of Eloise, and then back at the child patiently awaiting his answer. "Different things scare different people, Ivy. Some are afraid of the dark or of heights. And you? I'm afraid of losing important people." Ivy considered this for a moment. "But you can't lose us if you stay away. That doesn't make sense." The childish logic was flawless. Landon couldn't help a small smile. "You're absolutely right," or "It doesn't make any sense at all." In the evening, when the nurse suggested they go home, Ivy vehemently refused. "I'm not leaving Mommy alone in the hospital," she declared, with a surprising determination for someone so small. Landon intervened. "We're staying here." His tone brooked no argument. When the nurse began to explain the hospital rules, he simply asked, "Who should I call to authorize our stay?" "The director." Half an hour later, a comfortable sofa bed had been set up in Eloise's room. As the night wore on, Landon watched Ivy fight sleep, determined to keep vigil by her mother's side. He sat next to her on the sofa bed. Your mom is going to be fine, Ivy, he said softly. The doctors are taking care of her, and you need to rest too. I'm scared, the little girl confessed, her voice barely a whisper. What if she gets worse while I'm sleeping? I won't let that happen, Landon promised. I'll stay awake and watch over both of you. Ivy studied him with an intensity that sometimes unnerved him, as if she could see right through him. Then, to his surprise, she leaned against his shoulder. Can you be my real dad? She asked, her voice soft with sleepiness. Landon felt his heart stop for a moment. The question, so innocent and yet so profound, struck him like a bolt of lightning. All his doubts, all his fears, seemed insignificant in the face of this simple request from a child. I can be as much as you want me to be, he replied, the words coming directly from his heart, bypassing the usual filter of his rational mind. Ivy smiled, her eyes already closing. Good, she murmured. I've always wanted a dad. Minutes later, she was fast asleep, still leaning against him. Careful not to wake her, Landon settled her on the sofa bed and covered her. Then he turned his attention back to Eloise. He sat in the chair beside the bed, watching the gentle rhythm of her breathing. The doctors had said the fever was breaking, that the antibiotics were working. Still, he couldn't help but worry. What have you done to me, Eloise Bennett? He whispered to the sleeping figure. How did you manage to tear down all my defenses? During the night, Eloise woke up briefly. She seemed surprised to find Landon still there, sitting by her bed working quietly on his laptop. You don't have to stay, she murmured, her voice hoarse. I know, he replied simply, but I want to. Their eyes met in the dim light of the room, and something passed between them. A silent understanding, a connection that words could not adequately describe. Thank you, she said at last, before drifting back to sleep. The following days established a new routine. Landon divided his time between the hospital and quick visits to the office to handle urgent matters. He arranged for Ivy not to miss school. A private tutor came to the hospital for a few hours to keep the girl up to date with her studies. In the evenings, he and Ivy would have dinner together in the hospital room, while Eloise, getting stronger each day, watched the interaction between them with a smile. There was a growing ease in the way they communicated, as if they had created their own language. You've changed, Mrs. Peterson commented during one of his brief visits to the office. More human. Landon didn't reply, but he knew she was right. Something fundamental had shifted within him, as if an invisible wall that had separated him from the rest of the world had finally begun to crumble. On the fourth day, the doctors announced that Eloise could be discharged the next day. The pneumonia had responded well to treatment, although she would still need a few days of rest at home. That night, when Ivy had finally fallen asleep, Eloise and Landon talked for the first time since she had been admitted. How can I ever thank you for all this? She asked, her voice still a bit weak but her clear eyes bright again. You took care of Ivy, coordinated everything, you haven't left. There's nothing to thank me for, he replied simply. Then, gathering his courage, he added, I'm sorry for my behavior these last few weeks. The distance. You were scared, she said softly. I understand that. It wasn't fair to you or to Ivy. Fear is rarely fair or rational, Eloise observed. Believe me, I know. A comfortable silence settled between them. They didn't need many words. Something had fundamentally changed in these days of crisis, as if the layers of formality and hesitation had been completely stripped away. Ivy asked me if I could be her father, Landon confessed after some time. For real? Eloise didn't seem surprised. And what did you answer? That I can be as much as she wants me to be. Eloise's eyes welled with unshed tears. And how much do you want to be? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Landon knew his answer would define not only his future, but the future of all three of them. Everything, he finally replied. I want to be everything to you both if you'll let me. The next afternoon, Landon was personally driving the car that took Eloise and Ivy home. He had insisted on picking them up from the hospital himself, Dismissing his driver, at the small apartment, everything was prepared for their arrival. Landon had hired a team to deep clean the place, stock the fridge, and even place fresh flowers in vases. A nurse would come twice a day to check on Eloise's recovery, and a domestic assistant would take care of cleaning and meals for the next week. "You thought of everything," Eloise commented, visibly moved by the arrangements. "I tried," he replied with a small smile. Ivy ran through the apartment, excited to show Landon her room and her toys. It was the first time he had been in their personal space, and every detail revealed something new. The bilingual books on the shelves, Ivy's drawings taped to the fridge, the photos of Eloise with Thomas, few but carefully preserved. After helping Eloise get settled and making sure everything was in order, Landon realized it was time for him to leave. But as he reached for his keys, he felt a reluctance he could no longer ignore. Ivy, sensing he was about to leave, ran and grabbed his hand. "Will you be back soon?" Landon looked at the small hand holding his, then at the girl's hopeful face, and finally at Eloise, who was watching the scene with an expression that was impossible to fully decipher. It was as if something broke inside him, not painfully but in a liberating way. All the barriers, all the fears, all the hesitations simply crumbled. "And I love you," he said, the words coming out naturally, as if they had always been there, just waiting for the right moment. "With you, Eloise, I've found peace. With Ivy, I've found meaning." Ivy squeezed his hand tighter, a radiant smile lighting up her face. "You're my dad now," she declared with the absolute certainty that only children possess. Eloise approached, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. Without a word, she simply rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, a soft kiss, full of promise and a future that suddenly seemed perfectly clear for all of them. The new house shone under the autumn sun. Larger than the previous apartment, it was located in a quiet neighborhood, with tree-lined sidewalks and a small garden in the back. It had been carefully chosen by Landon and Eloise, a new beginning for the family they were now forming. 6 months had passed since the hospital episode, 6 months of profound changes, of discoveries, of building shared routines. Landon, who had always considered his penthouse merely a place to sleep, now understood the meaning of home. From the porch, he watched Ivy playing in the garden. The girl ran chasing soap bubbles that Eloise blew, her blonde hair shining like gold in the sunlight. Her laughter filled the air, a sound he had never imagined he could treasure so much. "Don't you seem thoughtful?" Eloise commented, sitting down beside him after Ivy became distracted by a butterfly. Landon smiled, lacing his fingers with hers. "I was just reflecting on how my life has changed in a year, from a lonely CEO to a family man. Who would have thought?" "Regrets?" she asked with a slight smile, already knowing the answer. "Almost never," he replied, leaning in to kiss her briefly. "Though I still find it surreal sometimes, as if I might wake up and find it was all just a dream." Eloise squeezed his hand. "It's not a dream. We're here." They sat in silence for a few moments, watching Ivy, who was now crouched down, examining something on the ground with intense concentration. "I received an email today," Eloise said at last, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "From my father's old assistant." Landon turned to face her. "Margaret?" "Yes. Apparently, my father had a mild heart attack last week. Is he okay?" Eloise nodded. "According to her, yes, he's recovering at home. It was just a scare, but..." Her voice faltered slightly. It made Margaret think that maybe it was time to try for a reconciliation. Landon watched the conflict on Eloise's face. He knew that expression well, the same one he had seen in the mirror for years when he thought of his own father. "What do you think?" she asked, her eyes seeking guidance. Landon took a deep breath. This was delicate territory, laden with complex emotions he knew intimately. For months, he had avoided talking about his own family past, even with Eloise. But now, seeing her internal struggle, he realized it was time to share that part of himself. "There's something I've never told you," he began, his voice softer than usual. "Tell me about my own father." Eloise shifted in her chair, giving him her full attention. It was one of the things he loved most about her, her ability to be completely present when someone was speaking. My father was a lot like yours in some ways. Very successful businessman, strictly with very specific expectations for his son. Landon paused, organizing memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. When I decided to start my own company instead of taking over his, there was a rift. Harsh words were exchanged. Hurt pride on both sides. Eloise nodded silently, recognizing familiar patterns in the story. We kept our distance for years. Minimal communication, only on holidays and birthdays. I was building Radiant, determined to prove I had made the right choice. His eyes drifted to Ivy, now sitting on the grass, drawing patterns with a stick. When I finally started to succeed, a part of me wanted to share that with him. To show him I had made it, in my own way. And did you? Eloise asked softly. Landon shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. I waited too long. There was always another acquisition to finalize, another contract to close. I told myself I would call on the next holiday, that I would visit on his next birthday. Eloise squeezed his hand, sensing what was coming next. And I got the call on an ordinary Tuesday. He had suffered a massive stroke during the night. He died before I could get to the hospital. Landon's voice faltered slightly. I went years without truly talking to my father. We had a fight and he passed away before we could reconcile. I carry that weight to this day. He turned to face Eloise directly, his eyes meeting hers. You still have that chance, if you can reconcile with your father. Eloise was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words, the weight of his story. She remembered her own father, the man who had raised her alone after her mother's death, who had provided her with the best education, who took her on business trips with him when she was a little girl. The same man who had disowned her for loving someone he considered unworthy, who had refused to meet his own granddaughter, who had treated her as if she had ceased to exist. I don't know if I can, she admitted finally. There's so much hurt, so much wounded pride. I know, Landon replied. But I wonder, every day, what it would have been like to have that last conversation, to say that, despite our differences, I still loved him, that he was still my father. Ivy came running towards them, interrupting the conversation with her childish energy. Look what I found, she exclaimed, showing them a small rock with colored specks. It looks like a treasure map. Eloise smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. It's beautiful, sweetie. We'll put it in your collection. As Ivy ran back to explore more of the garden, Eloise remained thoughtful. Landon's words echoed in her mind, mixing with memories of her childhood. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, reading her bedtime stories, holding her hand at her mother's funeral when she was only 8. Maybe, she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Maybe it's time. 3 days later, they were at the airport. Eloise's decision had been made after long conversations with Landon and a careful explanation to Ivy about who her grandfather was and why they had never visited him. Will he like me? Ivy asked as they waited to board, her small hand holding her mother's tightly. Impossible not to like you, Landon replied, adjusting the bow in the girl's hair. Eloise smiled, grateful for his presence. Thank you for coming with us. We're a family, he replied simply. We face things together. The trip to Germany was long but smooth. Ivy proved to be an excellent traveler, dividing her time between drawing and watching movies and asking endless questions about the country where her mother was born. Munich greeted them with a clear sky and mild temperature. From the taxi window, Eloise watched the familiar streets go by, a mix of nostalgia and apprehension growing in her chest. It had been over 10 years since she was last there. The Reinhardt estate was located on the outskirts of the city, an imposing mansion surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens. When the taxi stopped before the gates, Eloise felt her heart race. Are you sure you want to do this? Landon asked, noticing her hesitation. She nodded, squeezing Ivy's hand. I am. The intercom was answered by Margaret's familiar voice. Seconds later, the gates opened automatically. It's like a castle, Ivy exclaimed, her eyes wide as they walked up the driveway to the main entrance. Margaret was waiting for them at the door, a woman with graying hair and an impeccable posture who had been Victor Reinhardt's personal assistant for over 3 decades. Her usually impassive face softened when she saw Eloise. "Willkommen zu Hause, Fräulein Eloise," she said in German. "Welcome home, Miss Eloise." "Thank you for arranging this, Margaret," Eloise replied in the same language. She introduced Landon and Ivy, noticing how the assistant's eyes lingered on the little girl. "He's in the library," Margaret informed them. "He's been waiting for you since early this morning." The library had always been Victor Reinhardt's sanctuary, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Eloise hesitated at the door, memories flooding her mind. How many times, as a child, had she found refuge there, reading beside her father on quiet afternoons? Victor Reinhardt was sitting in his favorite armchair near the window. The sunlight illuminated his austere profile, highlighting how the years had passed. He looked older, more fragile than she remembered. Upon hearing the door open, he turned slowly. "Eloise," he said, his deep voice slightly trembling. "Father," she replied, keeping her distance. His eyes shifted to the small figure beside her. Ivy, usually so talkative, was unusually quiet, curiously observing the man who was her grandfather. "And this is," he began, unable to finish the sentence. "Your granddaughter," Eloise completed. "Ivy Bennet." Something changed in Victor's face, an emotion Eloise had never seen before, a vulnerability completely foreign to the man she had known, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "She looks like you," he finally said, "when you were her age." Eloise nodded, feeling her own resolve begin to waver in the face of her father's evident emotion. Victor stood up with some difficulty, leaning on a cane. He approached slowly, stopping at a respectful distance. "I made the worst mistake of my life that day," he said, his voice little more than a whisper. "I let pride speak louder than love, and I've spent 10 years paying for it every single day." Eloise remained silent, the words caught in her throat. "Kayaki, I don't expect your forgiveness," Victor continued. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know." His voice broke. "I am sorry, my daughter. More than words can express." The tears he had held back began to fall freely. Victor Reinhardt, the business titan known for his coldness and rationality, was crying openly in front of the daughter and granddaughter he had never met. Eloise felt the weight of a decade of hurt and resentment in her chest. She remembered Landon's words about the burden of missed opportunities, of unspoken words. She looked at Ivy, who was watching her grandfather with a mixture of curiosity and childish compassion. With a deep breath, she took a step forward. "I made mistakes too," she said softly. "I should have tried again. I should have insisted." Victor shook his head. "The fault was mine. Mine alone." There was a moment of tense silence, charged with years of distance and unspoken words. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ivy let go of her mother's hand and approached her grandfather. "Are you crying because you're sad?" she asked, looking up with the frankness of children. Victor blinked and surprised by the direct approach. "I'm crying because I made a very big mistake," he replied, lowering himself with effort to get closer to her height. "And because I'm very happy to finally meet you." Ivy considered this for a moment, her little forehead furrowed in concentration. "Mommy says when we do something wrong, we have to say we're sorry." "Your mother is right," Victor agreed. "And that's what I'm trying to do now." Eloise watched the interaction, feeling years of hurt begin to dissolve in the face of her daughter's simple wisdom. She took another step forward, and then another, until she was standing before her father. She hesitated for a moment, decades of memories, good and bad, flashing through her mind. Then, with a deliberate movement, she reached out and hugged the man who had raised her, who had hurt her, who was still her father. Victor seemed momentarily stunned before returning the hug, holding her as if he feared she might disappear again. "Forgive me," he whispered against her hair. "Please forgive me." "I'm trying," she answered honestly. "It's a start." When they finally separated, Ivy was beside them, watching with a small smile. She held out her little hand and took her grandfather's. "Hi, Grandpa," she said simply, and in those two simple words, a bridge began to be built over a 10-year chasm. It wouldn't be easy, Eloise knew. There would be difficult conversations ahead, old wounds to be examined, trust to be gradually rebuilt. But looking at Landon, who watched the scene with an understanding smile, she understood what he had tried to tell her. Some opportunities only come once. Some words, if not spoken in time, can become the weight of what might have been, a silent, mean but constant burden carried for a lifetime. Today, at least, she had chosen not to add that weight to her heart. Spring had arrived with all its force, turning the park into an explosion of colors. Flowers bloomed in carefully planned beds, trees displayed new and vibrant foliage, and the sky was an almost impossible shade of blue. Landon ran alongside the small bicycle, holding the seat to maintain balance as Ivy pedaled with determination. Her pink helmet, perhaps a little too big for her head, wobbled slightly with each movement. "I'm doing it," she exclaimed, her face lit up by a smile that revealed the gap of a newly lost tooth. "You're doing great," Landon encouraged, subtly reducing his support without her noticing. "Remember to look forward, not at the pedals." Sitting on a nearby bench, Eloise watched the scene, a sense of fulfillment warming her chest. She had never imagined, in that hallway at Radiant Enterprises almost 2 years ago, that the arrogant CEO who had challenged her in 3 languages would become the center of the small universe they shared. Life had changed in ways none of them could have predicted. After reconciling with her father, Eloise had accepted a position as Director of International Relations at Radiant, coordinating the company's European expansion. Victor Reinhardt, recovered from his heart scare, now traveled regularly to visit them, eager to make up for lost time with his granddaughter. Landon, for his part, had discovered a new side of himself, more patient, more present, more connected to what really mattered. The company continued to thrive, but he now left the office on time, delegated more responsibilities, and often worked from home on Fridays. "Are you ready to try on your own?" Eloise heard Landon ask, bringing her back to the present moment. "What if I fall?" Ivy asked, a brief moment of hesitation in her voice. "Then I'll help you up," he replied simply. "But you're not going to fall, trust me." Landon ran a few more feet, still holding the bike. Then, with a smooth motion, he let go. Ivy kept pedaling, unaware that she was now balancing on her own. "You're doing it!" he shouted. "You're riding by yourself." When Ivy realized what was happening, her eyes widened for a second before turning into crescents of pure joy. "I'm doing it, Mommy, look." "I see, my love," Eloise replied, standing up to applaud. "You look amazing." The little bike traveled nearly 20 yards before it started to lose balance. Landon was already there, ready to catch her fall. But instead of crying over the small failure, Ivy laughed, impatient to try again. "One more time," she requested, adjusting her helmet. "I'll go further this time." 3 days later, the 3 of them were sitting in the small classroom along with other parents. Ms. Lawrence, Ivy's teacher, had invited families to the special essay day, when each child would read their writing on a meaningful topic. "Today," the teacher began, "our children will share essays about their families. They've been working on this for 2 weeks, and I must say I was impressed by the depth they've shown." One by one, the children stood up. They talked about family traditions, about older siblings, about grandparents who told stories, about vacation trips. When it was Ivy's turn, she walked confidently to the front of the room, holding a sheet of paper decorated with colorful drawings on the borders. She smiled broadly before beginning to read, "My family isn't like everyone else's. For a long time, it was just me and my mum. My first dad, Thomas, went to heaven when I was very little. I don't remember him much, but Mommy says he had blue eyes like mine and loved to tell stories." Eloise felt Landon's hand squeeze hers. They had decided from the beginning that Thomas would always have a place in Ivy's life, that his memory would be honored and preserved. Then, we met Landon. He was Mommy's boss and he seemed very serious, but one day he saw my drawing and he didn't laugh. He understood, and when Mommy got very sick, he took care of us. Ivy looked up from the paper, meeting Landon's gaze before continuing. "My dad is not my dad by blood, but he's my dad anyway because he stayed. because he takes care of me. Because he chose us, and we chose him too. Landon swallowed hard, an unexpected emotion tightening his throat. Eloise squeezed his hand harder, silent tears sliding down her face. The teacher said that family is made of people who share the same blood, but I think family is made of people who share the same love. And that is much more important. When Ivy finished, the room erupted in applause. She gave a small bow, her smile radiant, before running back to sit between Eloise and Landon. "Did you like it?" she whispered to Landon, her eyes seeking approval. He hugged her tightly, unable to find words for a moment. "It was perfect," he managed to say finally. "See, just like you." As they left the school, walking hand in hand under the golden afternoon light, Eloise reflected on her daughter's simple but profound words. They hadn't just rebuilt a life after loss and disappointment, they had created something new, a family forged not by obligation or circumstance, but by deliberate choice, by conscious love. A family that they had chosen, and that, more importantly, had chosen them too. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.